Hi, my name is David Knight, and welcome to those amazing Psalms. Psalm 31, Hope like a braided rope. Psalm 31 is like an anchor rope, braided with strands of deep trust, desperate prayers, and praise for God's goodness, all woven together. A rope that holds firm even in a raging storm. The context of this psalm is a devastating conspiracy in which the poet, probably David, says his closest friends have written him off. Verse 11 says, I am the contempt of my neighbors. I've been forgotten, ignored, and discarded like a useless broken plate. This terrible ordeal has taken a physical and emotional toll, and he is exhausted. His strength is sapped. The middle section of the poem, verse 9 to 14, is largely about this anguish and affliction, but that's just one of the strands. This psalm has some serious spiritual horsepower, and over the next 1,000 years it is quoted by Jonah, by Jeremiah, and by Jesus. Perhaps because it touches bottom so graphically, and yet its lament is infused with hope. It connects with us while we are still in the throes of our adversity. For example, the opening verses call on God to come quickly to save, to rescue and deliver, to be the rock of refuge that David needs God to be for him, and to protect him from the traps that have been set for him. The opposition against him is so strong, he is almost helpless. He depends on God to do the heavy lifting. But he is not passive. He asks God to lead and guide him so that he can honor God's name. That's something that has challenged me lately, asking God for wisdom and discernment, not assuming that I can figure out my own next steps. Despite the distressing circumstances, David reminds himself of God's character. God is faithful, righteous, loving, and merciful. 3 times David mentions God's hesed love, God's unfailing, loyal, covenant commitment to him. In verse 7, he says, I rejoice in your love, expressing how God's love lifts David's spirits and gives him joy. In verse 16, Lord, rescue me because you love me. In other words, this is an active love. Verse 21, you showed me the wonders of your love. The Message says, God's love is the wonder of the world. And I would echo that assessment, that God's love is a wonder-filled, wonderful gift. And I love how David never doubts God's bedrock love, even when all hell is breaking loose around him. In verse 21, he talks about being trapped in a siege, which may be literal, or it could be a metaphor for feeling completely helpless and trapped and blocked. But he says, God, you have hidden me in the shelter of your presence from the intrigues that are out to destroy me. Hidden by God. The way the Dutch people hid Jews like Anne Frank. The way the Canadian embassy in Tehran hid American diplomats in 1979 after the Iranian Revolution. Safe in the midst of intrigue. In the New Testament, Paul picks up on this idea and says, your life is now hidden with Christ in God. Hidden and protected, even though we still have to deal with a hostile world. David did a lot of hiding in caves when he was on the run to escape from King Saul. But David learned through this adversity that the best and safest hiding place is to be surrounded and protected by God's presence, which is not a cramped bunker, but a spacious place. That is a place of freedom and boundless opportunity, with generous breathing room and safe from fear. 2 remarkable verses speak of God's hands. Verse 15, my times are in your hands. Or as the Message puts it, hour by hour I place my days in your hands. What a great picture of active, mindful trust. Every hour on the hour, consciously entrusting yourself, your hopes and fears, and your plans for the day into God's powerful hands. And the other verse is verse 5. Into your hands I commit my spirit. I wonder how many faithful in Israel prayed this verse in the 1,000 years after it was written. But surely its most profound utterance was when Jesus called out these words on the cross. Into your hands I commit my spirit. A cry of absolute trust, despite everything this psalm speaks of, conspiracy, pain and anguish, contempt and abandonment. Jesus was entrusting his final breath to God. And through his trust, Jesus opens up for us a lavish profusion of grace. Verse 19 says, how abundant are the good things that you have stored up for those who fear you. Or as Isaiah said in Isaiah 64:4, quoted by Paul, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. That is some braided rope. Realism about our struggles, but resolute confidence in God, bolstering our courage and faith to take the final verse to heart. Be strong and courageous, all you who hope in the Lord. Take care.